Then to dazzle us with your presentation. Do you have a Bible?
Oh, yes.
All right, so our first speaker then would be Dr. Kevin Wall. He's a civil engineer and a town planner. He's an extraordinary professor at the University of Pretoria, a past president of the South African Institution of Civil Engineering. He has received both the Gold Medal of SAICE and the Lifetime Award of the National Science and Technology Forum, the highest honor that can be bestowed by the science, engineering, and technology community. A few months ago, we enjoyed the further distinction of graduating with the rarely awarded degree of Doctor of Engineering honoris causa, conferred by the University of Pretoria. So his topic is going to be 2 decades of assessing the condition of South Africa's fixed infrastructure, both directly and through the service delivery consequences. Thank you. Over to you, Prof.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. Can I be heard? Yes. Can I be heard? Yes. Thank you. Right. I have to confess that there's a certain amount of confusion that seemed to have happened with the conference, because I was originally told I could present on this, and now then I was put in a session called water, which doesn't quite fit, and now I'm in a session about public-private partnership, and doesn't fit there either. So if you're disappointed about that, then I don't quite know where you go, but maybe you stick around for the next speaker. But in the meantime, I'm presenting what was approved. Okay. Which I think is an interesting enough topic in its own right. How long have I got, Chair? Half an hour? Half an hour, because at one point I was told I've got an hour. So I've got a presentation for an hour, but I promise you we'll keep it short. I'm going to skip a lot of slides. I'm sorry about that. I can't help it. And I'm going to speak quite fast. My apologies, but it's just the way it is. And I was going to play you a little clip by Elvis Presley, which I can't do, so we're going to skip that. But one of his songs was, "I'm All Shook Up." And, oops. No, this thing is supposed to be going forward. Yes. Forward, yes. No. I'm pressing the same, I'm all shook up, yes. I'm pressing the same blooming thing. So, why it's not going forward, I don't know. If I press going backwards, will that help?
No, you can't imagine that this is necessary.
Yeah, this is the driver. This is a trip I did 2 weeks ago to the Eastern Free State.
For the Eastern Free State.
I'm trying to keep a steady camera while taking a picture of the road as we go down. But my presentation is about measuring condition of infrastructure, both through service delivery consequences and actually direct measurement. And that illustrates the problems of roads which are rough, been allowed to go rough because of lack of infrastructure maintenance. The consequences for the economy, for individual farmers and retailers and suppliers, are quite severe. And there's some quantitative stuff, work which was done by the CSR a dozen years ago, which was fantastic, and it's probably the best graphic I've ever seen of the topic. What is the damage that's actually being done? But you can see cracked eggs, a very good example. And some of the pictures of the roads, unfortunately, we have. I mean, look at the amount. Discovery Insurance, one of the biggest insurance companies in the country, talking about the amount of money which is spent on repairing consequences to vehicles of bad roads. Those pictures speak for themselves. The CSR study in 2009, the state of logistics, they worked closely over a period of time with Imperial Logistics and one of the big retailers, one of the big 3 retailers, on measuring the effect of bad roads on, ultimately, the cost of the produce to the consumers. And they came up with this kind of figure, that as your road condition deteriorates, the cost of vehicle repair and vehicle maintenance increases substantially. But what is that effect at the end? The difference between good roads and bad roads as measured. The average maintenance and repair costs from a good road is less than R1 at the time and is over R2 of the bad road. And that has an effect, obviously, of increasing by a factor of 2.2 the cost of vehicle maintenance. Who pays in the end? You guys do when you go to those shops. You pay more, up to 10% more, because the company is trying to cover the costs of the bad infrastructure that it took to get that produce into the refrigerator or onto the shelf when you go and buy it, for example, if it's consumer goods. Okay, and there are instances, many instances, where the provincial administrations, and we got this in the SAISI report cards as well, they have given up on maintaining many roads. And the only way in which the roads are in a fair state, in many cases, is because the local people band together to maintain them. So my contents, all shook up. I'm going to talk about what happened before the report cards, talk about the report cards, why is it appropriate that the report cards are done by engineering institutions, and then there's been 4 of these report cards, as you see. What did each one of them say? So, why are we so het up about infrastructure and reliability? As we heard from the Minister just now, its availability is one thing. You've got the cable there, you've got the road there. But its accessibility, its usability, reliability can be something very different. People can be deprived from use of the road, even though the road's outside the door, or use of the water, even though the water pipe is right there. So that's the kind of measure that we want. And of course, it supports the economy and a healthy quality of life, the condition of the infrastructure. Before the report cards, well, the CSR, again to their credit, over 20 years ago, identified that a big issue, post-94, we were fantastic building new infrastructure all over the show. But the CSR identified that we were very bad at operating, especially in maintaining it. We were not looking after this infrastructure that we were building at the same time. We were not looking after infrastructure from the past as well, which still had a 30 or 50-year life. And our CSR identified that, and there was a series of reports which came out. And at the time, there was very little press publicity on the issue. But to the credit of the South African Local Government Association, they brought out a couple of reports as well of the issue of municipalities not budgeting enough for maintenance and repair. It's a question of the skills, a question of the political will, but if you can have a fantastic maintenance plan, but if you're not putting money to it, then it's not going to get done, is it? So it said here, for example, municipality don't budget, something could spell disaster for the provision of services in the future, as billions of rand would be needed to repair and upgrade the systems. Very prescient. 20 years ago, it's what we've confronted with now. And this kind of thing. This is now from the CSR reports from many, many years ago. These are not current photographs. Overflowing sewers. 3-year power shock. Look at the date of that, 2004. Predicting Joburg will have power problems for electricity supply. And it underlines the issues. Costly organized business, infrastructure dilapidated, equipment beyond maintained beyond its lifespan. It's simply too old. At a certain point in time, you can only maintain it up to a certain point in time. After that, it's actually, you've got to replace it. You can't carry on patching the thing. And loss of skilled personnel. 20 years ago, that was identified. And then there were various studies, which the CSR did, this one commissioned to the Department of Water Affairs, as it was at the time, Asset Management Strategy. And then there was the big one, which was the National Infrastructure Maintenance Strategy, which was CSR authored on behalf of the Department of Public Works, and it was approved by Cabinet. Unfortunately, the department then didn't do much with it for the next umpteen years. But everything that needed to be done and said at the policy level was actually said nearly 20 years ago or more. But what's gone wrong since then has been this stuff has not, fantastic document, has not been implemented, unfortunately, to a large extent. And CSR got frustrated with this and said, well, we're not getting an impact. What are we doing? the stock of infrastructure is significant and replacement costs, but we're not getting the kind of traction and the publicity about this which needs to generate. Meantime, the private sector is looking after itself. So again, there's a picture from long ago. They Pick and Pay, they bought a generator. Of course, when you go to the Pick and Pay, you pay for the generator costs and the fact that the thing costs a couple of million. And the local restaurant that we patronize, my partner and I patronize, whenever there's load shedding, the place is packed. Absolutely packed. But the guy in the spaza shop, the guy with the spaza shop, he doesn't have this facility. He can't afford to put in a big fat generator like the other guys get. So infrastructure condition deterioration hits the poor the worst. And it's so terribly important. It's been picked up since by others. So we've got to emphasize the importance of infrastructure and bring importance to attention of decision makers. And that's what CSR tried to do. This is the kind of stuff said in the National Infrastructure Maintenance Strategy. What we did, we discovered that the counterpart of SAICI, South African Institution of Civil Engineering, which is well represented here today, the American Society of Civil Engineers, they have put together over a number of years since 1998 what they called a report card. It's like the American school report card. If you're good, it's A plus. If you're bad, it's E minus. They have another one goes down to F. But it's an indication of the condition of infrastructure. And it's a very easily understandable measure, isn't it? A, B, C, D, E. And SAICI decided and CSR decided, and they got together and they decided that we needed a South African infrastructure report card, something like that. That's the 1998 report card, and there's the emphasis of it, very much a citizen's guide, the Americans say. We are showing the citizens what the condition is, and by the way, here's a list of all your public representatives, there's their contact details, and here's pro forma letters you can write to them. Now, SAICI hasn't got that far, but that was a really good idea the Americans had. And they've been doing these things every 4 years. And this is the latest one, which is 2021. And in between, they do individual ones for the states, each of the 50 states as well. Why is it appropriate that engineering voluntary organizations do these things? Well, as the SAICI people here will attest, because, and I'll use the word we are the people who work with this stuff. We know what the condition is like. It's a concern to us. It's a matter of pride to engineers that we built this thing, and somebody else is not looking after it, or it's not being looked after because there's no budget or whatever. So it's a matter of importance. And we obviously, the people who put a dedicated task team together to go and do this thing because we believe so much in the importance of infrastructure. And what SAICI learned, and from the British Institution of Civil Engineers, which also has the system, keep it simple, emphasize that the engineers know what we're talking about, we've got credibility, keep the audience, who you're writing for, and then professional judgment. It's not accurate statistics, there's a lot of professional judgment in there as well. And they all started small, they don't necessarily have one every year, and the scope and formats evolved over the years. The British, for example, they have a State of the Nation, they call it, and there's infrastructure, what's that, 2014. So they, every 4 years they have one of the national infrastructure. In between they do other ones. That's the grades at the time. And in between they do other ones, like this one for Scotland and one for Wales. And then they also do other ones. This is the last of the reports which came out last year. And the emphasis there was about infrastructure productivity as opposed to condition of infrastructure. But they still do every 4 years the condition of infrastructure nationally. What purpose we try to achieve? Well, to draw the attention of government and the public to the importance of maintenance and to factors underlying the state. What's underlying this fact that the condition is good there, but it's bad over there? What are the difference between those two places or those two institutions? And it's to inform and lobby with different audiences, different sophistications. And I see, but especially the Americans, lots of material on the websites, more detailed, and as I mentioned, pro forma lobby letters and so on. And what we would like to have is a coordinated, long-term, sustainable approach. Infrastructure maintenance must rank higher for public funds. And partnerships, where possible, and we heard the Minister for Electricity talking a lot about partnerships. Yes, all levels of government, it's difficult decisions. You can't say to the politicians, well, you can't have that nice new thing now which will win your votes for the next election. You've actually got to put that money into looking after the stuff you've got now, otherwise in 5 years' time it's going to break. Of course, the politicians will say, 5 years' time, why should I be worried about that? Anyway, So difficult decisions, and got to improve the skills base and change societal demand behavior, which is SAIC's euphemism for saying, please don't break stuff. Don't vandalize it. Don't sabotage it. That's our euphemism. What did the 2006 report card say? Well, Engineering News had the headline, patch and pray. The approach to a large extent was, we'll patch the stuff and just pray it holds together, you know. A Band-Aid kind of approach. Not the way to go. Chronic underspend, it says there. And then on that score, that grade from A to E, average, and it's difficult to define an average. How do you average between roads and airports and harbours and water and things like that? How do you average that? Well, if you'll accept that we have to try and get a picture to the public. It's a picture, right? And on that picture, it was D+ in that year. And just a more rigid definition of what the A, B, C, D, E is. A is comparable to the best internationally. C is acceptable, although stressed, will need investment. You've got to do something about it. It's okay now, but it's doing the job, but you've got to spend money on it. You can't just expect it to stay in that condition. And then E is unfit for purpose, failed on the verge of failure. What did the 2011 report card say? Well, that was shortly after the World Cup and all those investments in airports and stadiums and freeways and so on, and the Gautrain as well. And it said that the grade had gone up, average grade had gone up, okay? So it's a marginal improvement, the average improvement because of that heavy investment in those big things. However, quote, quality and reliability of basic infrastructure serving the majority of our citizens is poor and getting worse, urgent attention. That was the message from 2011. Okay, so let's see what happened in 2017. Well, the SAICI report card team had a lot of difficulty in getting good data. The infrastructure people, the owners, were getting reluctant to release information that made them look bad. And they didn't want to release the stuff that they were giving out. Also found that there was less monitoring going on than had been the case before. Now, how can you plan your priorities if you don't know what the situation is like? What does that condition look like? But there was less of that happening, which is less payment management systems and things like that. Very unfortunate. There were more and more destructive service delivery protests. I put that in inverted commas. Greatly increased theft and vandalism. Limited success with, for example, water demand management, and then a high profile for climate resilience. And this is a classic one. It's probably the best example I've ever seen of what happens when you defer maintenance. And there's this little graph which the then CEO of Eskom, Mr. Matona, put forward, and it shows that round about the time of the World Cup, when the instruction came apparently from very high up, that you are not to, you've got to keep the lights running, you've got to keep the electricity going, you can't reduce it, you have to keep everything going. So put aside your maintenance plan. He admitted that, and in a couple of years after that, the chickens started to come home to roost. And you saw this unplanned capability loss factor climbing. Now, if that's not a testament to what happens, not that year, but later, if you defer maintenance, I don't know what is. Right, so 2017, the CSR did most of the sector reports, contributing to the report card. Mostly desktop reports with very little which went out specifically, some examples of actually going to go and measure. But otherwise, they got from those with credible information, and CSR, of course, had access to a lot of clients for whom they've been doing work, like Department of Housing and Transnet, the Ports Authority. Since this is by the CSR team, reviews by the CSR team, moderation of gradings, moderation being things, how do you compare apples with oranges, how do you compare condition of airports with the condition of water and sanitation and stuff like that. And publication dissemination, and then this was the 2017 one that came out and looking like, and then those are the overall conclusions. From D+ in the first report card, going up to C-, the second report card, CSR, SAICI said, we're now back to D+ in the year 2017. And subsequently, there was a lot of press coverage, not just of the report card, but of infrastructure generally over these years. And you'll probably find that those two statements are quite heretical, inflammatory, controversial maybe, But I just want to point out to you that they are said by very credible people, and not engineers, but people with high profiles. The first one by the Gift of the Givers founder, and the second one by the former finance minister. But the finance minister, forget income grants. Oh my goodness, fix the stuff first. Maybe, that's what he said. I'm quoting. The Auditor General's had a lot to say in the last few reports on the MFMA of an indictment on the local government accountability system, which failed to act and arrest a decline, which were manifested by service delivery challenges. She wasn't looking at the report card and what the engineer said. She was looking at the service delivery effects, especially delivery of services for the poor, which was a point that Saisit made a little bit earlier. The most jarring revelations concerned the impact of failures on the poorest. Rightly so. Just last couple of weeks, this report came out from the Human Rights Commission of water supply disaster unless the municipalities tackle maintenance and corruption as well. And just lately we've had a series of headlines, these are all in the last week or so, as you see, of Joburg's water supply, hemorrhaging supply, water outage 5 days in Mhlanga and Durban North areas. And this slide serves to illustrate that when one service goes down, the other one also can go down. So Metro Rail in the Western Cape, the services were suspended not because of something that PRAS had done, although that was bad enough, but because Eskom went down in that area and couldn't supply electricity anymore. One way. The PRAS decision to cancel the security contracts a couple of years ago has had disastrous consequences for the rail system, costing us billions to put it back again. That kind of thing. And if people say, where must the fix start? The fix must start at the top, with the boards and councils and that level, because this was a decision that was taken despite the advice of the engineers, against the advice of the engineers. But look at the consequences. And then PRAS, we know PRAS is not in a very good space all around. Transnet, coal exports plummet due to South Africa's Transnet crisis. That little trip we did 2 weeks ago, where you looked at a lot of rail stuff. Bethlehem Station, they used to have 70 trains a day not long ago on that line between Durban and Bloemfontein, passing through Harrismith and Bethlehem. There's now 2 trains a day. That's all. How does the stuff get from Durban to Bloemfontein? We have new trains of a new type. The N3, climbing up from Renus Pass. That rail traffic has gone on the roads, with consequences. KZN's deadly truck-heavy highways need relief from a functioning rail network, says Transnet, says SANRAL. Transnet seeks state intervention. Southwest coal exporters facing rail rates of amount of traffic plummet a fifth. And then, just lately, threatening jobs. The failure of the infrastructure is not just threatening service delivery, it's threatening jobs. If that's not a wake-up call now, I really don't know. Anyway. Tourism. Durban, how much was it hit by failing wastewater? And even our iconic heritage sites. The minister admitted governments failed to do regular maintenance of Robben Island heritage site, leading to decaying infrastructure over the years. So what did the 22 infrastructure report, it was in November last year, by the way, it came out. What did that say? Those of information are the sectors that were covered. Okay? And some figures, Western Cape, we got best data out of Western Cape, opposed to the other provinces. You see the condition of infrastructure. Blue is very good, down to that purpley thing is very poor. But they've prioritized the highly trafficked routes. That's what that graph says. And even Cape Town, which prides itself as being like #1 of the metros, they are predicting if they don't get more budget, then the condition of infrastructure, the amount of very good is going to reduce, and the amount of very poor is going to increase. We know the story, but it's graphic in this picture. Transnet Freight Rail has climbed over the years, over these 70 years. The amount of traffic carried, but it's fallen just lately, whereas PRAS has just taken this complete nosedive. And again, who does that hit the most? The poor. Operator occurrences, as Prosser calls it. Security-related incidents. Look at that red chart. An increase over recent years. It's scary. It really is scary. AXA Airports Company depends upon revenue from traffic, air traffic, and COVID period hit them heavily as far as revenue is concerned, which has repercussions on the amount of maintenance, operation, and expansion which they can do. All right, so just to clarify what the various ones are, thank you. I'm nearly at the end, and that's okay. We've now down at the lowest last year, with the lowest we've been ever so far as the overall risk is concerned. And it really, really is scary. This is a very difficult one to read, so I put it rather in a chart, and these are only the roads ones. There's other ones for water and that as well. Just to give you a bit of an idea there, you can see across the various years as to what the position has been. We still have some very good stuff. Airports Company is still pretty good. National Roads is still pretty good. But then when you get down to some of the unpaved roads and so on, it's really not good at all. The ports, look at those. The rail, heavy haul freight lines, not as good as it was, but still pretty good. Gautrain is good, not as good as it was. And our price is down at E. And the president actually referred to this in his weekly letter about a month ago. He referred to the report card and the fact that it's been given E for price. So it does have a certain credibility. And I want to end with acknowledgement. The report card was entirely the work of volunteers, most of them from the technical divisions of SAICI, and particular thanks for the data I've used in this presentation to the Transportation, Marine and Railway and Harbour Engineering divisions, and also to the multitude of willing officials in both private and public sector who assisted with source data and reports. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And apologies for rushing it so much.
Yeah.
There we go. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, Professor. Can I ask your indulgence? We'll ask questions after the second presenter has also presented, just to make up for time.
Sorry, Chair, and please don't allow me to forget, I've actually got some of the report cards here if somebody wants.
Kolisi Lekunene, are you sorted? Yes, so our next speaker is going to be Kolisi Lekunene from Umgeni Word. Yeah, lessons learned in dispute resolution during construction of Spring Grove water treatment works in KZN.
Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. As mentioned by our esteemed chair, my name is Twalisi Legunene. I am a professionally registered civil engineer. I've been practicing for about 15 years now, and I'm also a fellow of the Association of Arbitrators of Southern Africa, NPC. I work in a company called Umgeni Tugela Water, and this case study is on one of our projects. So I'm just going to briefly go through my presentation. I'll talk about alternative dispute resolution. I'll then go into Umgeni Tugela's project implementation, discuss the project at hand, and lessons learned and the recommendations I would like to present. So basically, in any commercial relationship, disputes are bound to arise where you find parties have varying contractual interpretation, and either party has not fulfilled their obligation, or another party perhaps is denied its rights in the contract. The disputes are caused by conduct of either party. It could be a third party, it could be political, environmental, it could be legal causes. And this often leads to conflicting interpretations by the parties. So there are factors that are within the parties' control that lead to the disputes often, such as poor contract drafting, lack of understanding of the contractual terms before a tenderer will actually fill in the tender document and submit an offer to the employer to do the work. So when they start doing the work, now they realize there are things they had not anticipated. Sometimes there's poor contract administration during the contracts, low technical competencies, insufficient contract management personnel, and low contract management competence. Did I go back? Okay, so I'm going to now zoom into alternative dispute resolution, which I will just be referring to as ADR. ADR is a more flexible form of dispute resolution, which leads to shorter dispute resolution times using simpler processes, ending up in cheaper dispute resolution at the end of the day. So I'm comparing it to legislation, which involves lawyers and courts and all of that. Internationally, there's been a relatively slow uptake of ADR, looking at countries like Germany, Palestine, UK, and USA, which have suffered adversarial attitudes in the past. A study showed that in Germany, in a year, there are about 85,000 construction disputes that are resolved via litigation. And there's only 1,750 in comparison that actually uses ADR. Reasons have been given by several writers that one of the reasons for this is the lack of understanding of the pros and cons of ADR. Fortunately, in countries like the USA, the UK, and South Africa, you find that these attitudes are slowly changing. So I'll talk now about, my apologies, a few of the methods that are commonly used in South Africa. There are a lot more than the three, but in South Africa, we generally, in the construction industry, generally these are the three that are utilized. So we've got mediation, we've got adjudication, and we've got arbitration. Briefly, mediation is a form of a dispute resolution method where the parties have the maximum control. They talk among themselves. You can have a mediator, but it's not essential. They come up with win-win scenarios. They generate ideas among themselves. And basically, the solution ends up being one that both parties can be happy with. However, mediation does not limit the parties' legal rights, so they can still follow a legal route. There is adjudication, which is often referred to as an on-the-run dispute resolution. It involves a consensually selected third party that comes into the dispute and assists the parties to resolve their dispute. Once the adjudicator makes a decision, it is final. It can only be reviewed by arbitration and litigation. I know that's a bit of a contradiction, but finally in the sense that it is binding, the parties are expected to comply with it. Unless there's a dispute, then there's a formal method that they can use to dispute it and then move on to arbitration or litigation. In South Africa, the High Court's robust approach to enforcing adjudicators' decisions have been typified by Mr. Justice Spilsberg's statement in the ISO Africa, Frankie Africa JV versus Bombela Civils case, where he said, "The court is required to give effect to the terms of the decision made by the adjudicator." This ruling, or this statement, and several others have made adjudication to be quite entrenched in South African jurisprudence. Even the CIDB, which is the Construction Industry Development Board of South Africa, they've officially introduced arbitration as the method of ADR in our contracts. This is since 2003, so it's nothing new. It's one of the things that contributed to the ADR methods being considered for dispute resolution. Then the last one, not the least of course, is arbitration. It's similar to adjudication in the sense that it also involves a consensually selected third party who comes in and makes an impartial assessment of the party's submissions, and he makes a reasoned ruling. An arbitrator has the option of having a hearing, which assists the parties to present their cases verbally in more complex situations, which assists the arbitrator in reaching the right conclusion. And the arbitrator has no connection to the courts, of course, even though he functions or she functions more or less like a judge. The arbitrator's decision is called an award, and it's not subject to appeal unless both parties agree. In South Africa, we have the Arbitration Act number 42 of 1965, which governs domestic arbitration in this country. It provides that the arbitrator's award be made an order of court. So a party cannot avoid honoring the award because now it made an order of court. The court can review and set aside an award under very restricted circumstances. The arbitrator has the widest discretion of powers given by law. So basically, that is just an organogram showing the various options that are available should you have a contractual provision for ADR in your contract document. So Umngeni Uthugela Water, let me just do it like that, is a state-owned entity which was established to provide water and water-related services to institutions and customers in its gazetted service area. It prepares annual infrastructure master plans that consider the water demands, natural water resources, and available water treatment conveyance infrastructure to determine what infrastructure needs to be built in an upcoming 5-year period. So in the period of 2016 to 2021, one such identified project was the Greater Mpofana Bulk Water Supply Scheme, which included the construction of the Spring Grove Dam water treatment works. That is basically a photograph of during the construction of the treatment works. So this particular project, ladies and gentlemen, the entire scheme, let me say, was designed in-house by Umngeni Water personnel. The treatment works, as you see, the pump stations, 2 reservoirs at 12 megaliter and a 5 megaliter, and about 20 kilometers of steel pipeline was all designed in-house. The construction was rolled out in 3 different contracts, which were all compiled by Umngeni Water employees, and the construction monitoring was undertaken by the state-owned entities' employees as well. In volume 2 of the tender document is where we would find the contractual provisions, which apply once the contract is in place. And these provisions showed us that the conditions of contracts applied were the General Conditions of Contract for Construction Works of 2010. In short, it's GCC 2010. And then it also incorporated special conditions of contract which vary or amplify certain clauses of the GCC. In the CIDB guidelines, which I mentioned earlier, the GCC 2010 clause 10.3.1 sets out the conditions to be met for dispute notice to be issued by the employer or the contractor. So in a construction project, you'll have your contractor and you'll have your employer and the engineer. If the contractor is not happy with a particular instruction given by the engineer, or perhaps he sees that he needs to get more money for a work that he sees that it's outside of the scope or the method to be used is costing more than what it anticipated, then he submits a claim. And if the engineer assesses the claim and sees that it's not valid, he can reject it, or he can award it. Now the contractor has an opportunity, if he's not happy with that, to dispute. The employer has an opportunity, if he or she is not happy with that ruling, to dispute as well. So the GCC made it very clear that when such a dispute arises, it shall be referred immediately to adjudication in terms of clause 10.5 unless amicable settlement is contemplated. So in this particular project, we see, I've just put an excerpt here of the contract data, which talks about the dispute resolution. So if you find that a matter is being referred to adjudication, the CIDB best practice guideline is what is to be followed. There'll be one adjudicator on the adjudication board. If the dispute is still not resolved, the solution was then arbitration. This is quite a critical component of a contract document because if it is not made clear up front, it causes unnecessary admin and discussions and conversations when a dispute has already arisen and all the parties want to do is solve it and move on. So in looking at the case study of the construction of the Spring Grove Dam water treatment works, I looked at the claims that were raised by either the contractor or the employer, the nature of the claims, the relief claimed by the contractor, the rulings, the claims that the disputes that were referred to adjudication, the outcome of those disputes, and arbitration where it was considered. I interviewed the employer, the engineer, engineer's representative, and management within Umgeni Water. And the outcome, as you can see, there was a total of 43 claims, and they fell into 5 main categories. You've got technical data as per clause 2.3 of the GCC, site conditions, accepted risks as per clause 8.3, which are the risks that are beyond the contractor's control, access to site, and other issues. So we can see that about a whopping 46% was due to technical data. So this means incomplete drawings, incomplete specifications in the contract document, for example. And we see 9% due to site conditions, 18.6% where it is accepted risks like riots, social disruptions, access to site, and of course 7% fell into the other category. So just to discuss briefly now, when a dispute has been raised, GCC prescribes that the dispute notice must state the nature of the dispute and the extent of the redress sought. So when I analyzed the dispute notices, I picked up what was the nature, what was the problem, what was the cause of the dispute. I identified that one of them was the time provisions, which is clause 10.111. The time provisions is basically the amount of time within which the contractor must lodge a claim for something that he feels he is entitled to. So what happened is, in one particular case, the contractor applied to say, Mr. Engineer or Mrs. Engineer, please can we have a break during the builder's break? So basically, they requested that the clock should stop ticking when the builder's break starts and then continue ticking after the builder's break. But according to the contractual provisions, this was not allowed. The clock was supposed to just click continuously. The engineer made a decision without consulting the employer. This was in contradiction of clause 3.2.1 of the GCC, which says that the engineer must consult the contractor and the employer before making any ruling on any matter presented before him, be it cost, be it claims. So the employer then raised a dispute in regards to this. A second reason was interpretation. The clauses for extension of time, there was varying views on that. Another interpretation issue where it came to the CPG, payment of CPGs in the contract. The reason behind the engineer's decision, the basis of the quantum of the days and proven additional costs awarded. Again, an interpretational issue, application of clause 9.1, engineer's definition of direct cost and the subsequent quantum of such. And then now I just want to take us to a brief summary of the disputes that actually came up. There were 7 in total of the 43 claims, 7 disputes were raised, and 1 was time barred. 2 of them, they concluded in mediation. So there was an amicable settlement and a reduced claim put forward, which was accepted by both parties. 4 were actually referred to adjudication, and some were successful, some were partially successful. And 1 was referred to adjudication. There was an adjudicator's decision, which was disputed by the employer. The employer felt that the adjudicator exceeded his powers by providing alternate relief to the contractor, which was out of his powers. So he also said that, the employer said, even if the adjudicator rules that the adjudicator was within his powers, the ruling will still be challenged on substantive grounds. The contractor decided to offer an amicable settlement to the employer, which the employer accepted. So now if we go into the lessons learned that I just want to highlight here. Several claims, as discussed, were abandoned by the contractor even before the engineer's ruling. 7 disputes did not even go on to adjudication or arbitration because of successful negotiations in the form of amicable settlements and the reduced claims. So this leads to, indeed, a much quicker and more use of a give-and-take approach. It encourages cooperation, open dialogue, and creativity in dispute resolution, while giving the parties complete control of the process. And it can happen during the adjudication, during arbitration, or even before. Clause 3.1.2 of the GCC compels the engineer to consult the employer and the contractor before making a ruling. It's an important step in the process of evaluating claims, ensuring that both sides are heard and that the engineer can make a correct decision. The engineer, ladies and gentlemen, is very critical in preventing disputes in a construction contract. So they have to be highly competent in contracts management and scheduling so as to effectively fulfill their task. There was incorrect interpretation of contractual provisions, and often this was the cause of the disputes, as I have presented. So the employer has the responsibility as the drafter of the contract document to make the contractual provisions as clear and succinct and complete as possible to minimize these kind of disputes. The famous Latham report stated that procedures relating to procurement and tendering, if those are improved, then conflict can be reduced in the construction contract. So interpretation, ladies and gentlemen, is a major cause of disputes. And as clear as the GCC provisions are, various interpretations still arise because we are all different people with different backgrounds and different ways of thinking and looking at things. It's important to realize that adjudicators are not God. They can err in their judgments, in their decisions. So parties should ensure to review adjudicators' decisions. Don't just take it as gospel truth. Look at it and you may find some things you do not agree with. Technical data, ladies and gentlemen, contributed to 46% of the claims submitted by the contractor. Fortunately, this was an in-house project. But had it been undertaken by a PSP, the employer, which is a professional service provider, like a consultant like many of us are here today, the employer could have claimed from the consultant, and that would have led to quite sour relations moving forward. I'd now like to go into recommendations. In order to reduce the number of claims and disputes in construction projects, proper planning is imperative. Clear, complete, unambiguous contract documentation is a must. Lessons learned from previous contracts must be taken into consideration when contracts are being drafted, so as to make the contract clear and minimize contract interpretation disputes. At the start of the contract, it is advisable for the employer, the engineer, and the contractor to sit together and discuss common points of dissension in terms of interpretation of certain contractual provisions to ensure that a common interpretation is adopted from the start. Project managers should be competent in negotiation and in contracts management. The engineer and the employer need to be adequately resourced in order to match the contracts management skill and expertise of the contractor. Mostly in these in these large value projects, you find highly skilled and competent contracts management on the contractor's side, but the employer falls short at times, and this is a great disadvantage. So an investment in forensic scheduling should also be considered. Parties' view on the award of alternative relief should be discussed with the adjudicator at the start of the proceedings. Last but not least, ladies and gentlemen, project specifications should be adequately reviewed for completeness, accuracy, correctness before the commencement of procurement activities. A robust quality management system should be followed. I have been doing designs for 15 years. I know the pressure that comes often from politicians, often from senior management. We are under pressure. But the fact that we are professionals means we should be able to put our foot down and resist certain instructions and timeframes that put the project at risk at the end of the day. I know it sounds idealistic, but it's a starting point and we can progress moving forward. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, preparation, preparation, preparation. It's key. A competent engineer is critical. I'm speaking to a room of engineers. Let us make sure we learn, we know, we get experience so that we can do the best that we can as an engineer on a construction site. Cooperative approach is key. We are working together. It's not an us and them scenario. If we work together, we consider each other and where everybody is coming from, it is better for the project. And of course, I found that the parties in this particular project clearly understood GCC 2010 provisions when it comes to dispute resolution and the processes that must be followed. Thank you very much for your time, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Madam Kunene. I'll open the floor for questions. Are there any questions for our speakers today? Yes, sir. Please introduce yourself and your affiliation before you ask the question. Thank you.
Good day, everyone. My name is Simpiwe Biela. I'm from the Department of Water and Sanitation, working as a construction manager for one of our projects in the Free State. I was so hooked by the presentation that was done by Professor Kevin Hall. It's not mainly like a question that I want to ask, but it's just to add on the frustrations on what he had presented, looking at the degrading infrastructure networks in South Africa, especially the rail network. It's a huge concern of what it has become now compared to the last, I would say maybe 20, 30 years. Because now I look at most of the road infrastructure networks now are mostly imposed by the logistic truck companies, trucks on the roads. So now this means now there's a lot of high design standards that has to be now catered for these new loads on our road networks as well. And also just looking at the probability of catastrophic events happening on our road networks as well because of the truck loads that we are having now. And also, these also increase the insurance cover fees, road maintenance fees, and possibly the cost on fuel due to sudden demand that is needed to be fulfilled. So maybe one question one would ask is, what is the main root cause for not setting aside maintenance cost on our infrastructure networks, especially the rail network infrastructure? What happened? Where did we go wrong? Thank you.
Thank you. Other question? We'll take two at a time.
This side.
Quiet, sir. Your name and affiliation?
Yes, I'm Professor Peter Panzkowski. I'm formerly the head of civil engineering at the Nelson Mandela University. And I don't have major questions, it's more reaction. First to Professor Wall. I attended a conference in Beijing in 1996. It was about 3 times the size of the number of chairs here, and they were packed. But I moved, it was a whole week. It was about water and sanitation for cities and towns. And I walked had quite a bit of conversations with people, and I said to them, those attendees, I said to them, come to South Africa. It's a wonderful land. We've got wonderful roads. You can travel from any place to any place. Our national roads are the best of the best in the world and so on. And I don't know whether I can look those people really in the eyes today. But what I just wanted to say to Prof. Wall is this: I was 20 years in the water field, water affairs, and later on in strategic planning. And we experienced exactly the same when he put those tables on there. The same tendency in water and in sanitation. But now we at strategic planning started to talk about it also at higher levels with our guys, with water boards, with ministerial people. And we said, we said in a very, I would say, friendly manner, professionally, listen guys, you must start looking at your maintenance. We see cracks in our waterworks, in our pump stations, the pumps, valves, all those, in our networks, in our water quality, and everywhere. And I don't want to talk now politics. I call it realistic politics, not party politics. But the questions, the answers that we got was the following. Look, we received this country in 1994 in a splendid condition. Splendid roads, the waterworks, everything was working, and so on. So why must we now spend money on new pumps and new valves or so and get them in stock or so? Because we have millions of people without water, millions of people without electricity to cater for. Now, you can't expect from us now to buy new pumps, and they are not depleted yet, they are not quite old, functioning now, whereas here are people without water, millions of them in the country. So it's a sort of a, I would say it's a situation that we fell in and that we found ourselves in. In the meantime, state capture also came in, and monies disappeared where it should have been, used. So what I just want to say, that degradation from A to B to D, D minus and so on, was similar in our field. And I also saw it with roads. I mean, we could obviously see it happening. But I think my suggestion now would be, we must find a balance. We must get the maintenance portion. Really, it must become much more serious. And we must get much more dedicated as well. But on the other hand, we must also realize that we have a backlog. And it will take time and so on, but please, we mustn't break it down in the meantime. So that is more or less what I just want to say. And I think it's the roads, it's the water, it's sanitation, it's electricity, it's so many of these huge infrastructure, how can I say, fields that have more or less the same statistics that we saw just now. And Mrs. Kunene, also not really a question, but just a recommendation or a remark. You mentioned the functions of Umgeni and the water board and so on, and I just thought, I hope you also look at floodlines, flash floodlines. And you also spend a bit of money there, because that will also be good money spent in the future, for our kids and so on, new generations. Floodlines are becoming more and more important. Just as I say, maintenance becomes more and more important. Thank you for my mini presentation. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Professor Peter, for the comments noted. I think the speakers would have noted those comments. Yeah, the topics today, they were quite disparate in a way, because the one is talking about infrastructure condition assessment and the other one is on dispute resolution. So just to try and balance things, let me ask a dispute resolution question. Madam Kunene, what are the key characteristics of successful ADR, alternative dispute resolution, in a project like the ones you presented today that are sort of translatable to, from an SA experience now to the other colleagues from other parts of the continent, that they can easily adapt or adopt? That's the question. So the first question was actually for Professor Kevin. What was the main root cause for not setting aside some kind of funding for infrastructure maintenance? That was asked by Simpiwe. I think that mic works.
Okay, let me come back.
Okay.
Please, thank you, gentlemen. The gentleman from the Free State, I'm sorry I didn't catch your name. I don't know particularly about Transnet, but I'm going to answer Professor Panzkowski as well, and there's actually a long list. What should be done? Right? The first one is measure the stuff. If you're the owner of infrastructure, it doesn't measure the condition of infrastructure. How the heck do you know how to prioritize what to spend where on your maintenance and that kind of stuff? Water affairs, DWS, for example, they had the green drop and blue drop, and then they dropped it for many years. And you just see the results deteriorated when the next one came out just recent, a couple of years back. They reinstituted those. Next one is willingness to put the budget down for maintenance as opposed to fancy things. I can tell you lots of war stories going back 30 years of the problem between politicians who look at the next election as opposed to the engineers are saying, but you know, we've got to do this now for 5 years' time, and the politician says, so what? I'm not going to be standing for election in 5 years' time. And they can getting the right skills. Next one is the issue, even if they wanted to put the budget down, the department or municipality wanted to put the budget down, they actually haven't got the money. And we see that with many of our municipalities. The municipal model which was set up, if you look at the 1998 local government white paper, which basically hasn't changed since then, is simply, it's a lot of pie in the sky, naive statements. And we're still trying to make that thing work. Are we mad? We need to be looking at that municipal model again, for example. Your short-termism, I mentioned that. In 1994, I take issue with Professor Panzkowski's statement about everything being really in good condition, with due respect, sir, in many cases, for the people who had. But the people who didn't have, well, it was a different story. And the sad fact is that we can talk about infrastructure and condition, but a lot of people today even don't have it all. So this discussion about condition is academic as far as they're concerned. They don't have infrastructure at all. People who don't have sanitation and so on. Which takes me to the next one, which is over-promising. How many times have I heard a minister or a DG get up and say, by the year 2003, we were 100% coverage of piped water to every single household. Now, any engineer will tell you that's impossible. You're chasing a moving target, and it's just absolutely impossible. And when you work out the cost of supplying somebody sitting on top of a hill in a rural area, and you just realize that it's just simply not on. You've got to look at local solutions, on-site solutions. So it's over-promising is another thing, including building the stuff which is over-promised with no chance whatsoever of that being maintained. Our standards are too high. If you look at some of our towns and cities built in the apartheid era, look at a place like Welkom, for example. I mean, that thing was built when there was money. There's just little employment of that type of thing. There isn't a financial base. It should not have been built to that standard. We just built too expensively. Since 94, for that period afterwards, as I mentioned in my presentation, for a number of years after that, government was not interested in maintaining. They said so openly. They said to my boss, Dr. Milford at the CSR, they tell that guy, Kevin Wall, to shut up. He's embarrassing us because he's talking about maintenance. We're not interested. We just want to roll stuff out. And it went on till about 2005. So we lost some time there because government was blatantly, and I can quote names and whatever, but I won't quote any names here to do. And then probably the last one, but I could go on a lot more, is that make sure your decision-making bodies have got the right people on board. And if you look at some of the problems that some of our SOEs have got, and some of the municipalities have, and some of the municipal entities have, you look at the board, constitution of the board, you wonder how the heck they've got people who fuss about clean audit, about HR, and all that kind of stuff. But they don't have the technical people on board. There's a wastewater treatment nearby. It's the biggest in the country in terms of volume and numbers of treatment works. And the board, that board should have microbiologists, chemical engineers, chemists, civil, electrical, mechanical engineers. They should have people like that on board. Not one. They haven't got one. Not one. And it's not many boards in that situation. They don't have technical people, which takes us back to some of the presentations before tea time as well. You've got to have the people, the engineering knowledge in the decision making. And if you don't have that right, then nothing else, with all respect, is going to come right.
So thank you, Chairperson, for your question. So what can our African colleagues take as a take-home in ADR? I think when we are looking at ADR, I have presented that the benefits, they outweigh litigation because it's cheaper, it's shorter, it's simpler, we get the dispute resolved quickly. But in order to even not get that far, we need to invest more in ensuring that our documentation is clear and easy to understand. In the preparation stage where we are doing our designs, let's invest in reviewing our work. Peer reviews is a start. If we don't even have the resources in-house, we can create partnerships with other fellow engineers and do those peer reviews. And it's for the employer to actually stand and insist on it, because sometimes we as engineers will just give you what we give you. If you don't know what you're looking at, you don't know. It's a bit of a wrong approach, but even the employer can participate here. I know there are some employers in the room. Communication. Once the construction has started, communication is key, cooperation is key. It's not an us and them. That kind of approach leads to everybody losing. So let's foster a cooperative environment between the engineer, the employer, and the contractor. And last but not least, I think I've said this and I cannot say it enough, the engineer in the construction project is the key. The key. We need to ensure as engineers that we are as competent as possible in contract management so that you can see a claim coming and you can prevent it, or you can discuss certain things to make sure that when the claim does come, it doesn't hit the employer as bad, and the employer will not feel so bad to pay the extra money that they had not budgeted for. I'd like to leave it there, Chairperson. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I just want to say that when roads are being awarded for construction, is there a standard that says how long the road is going to last before it is no more? Because people see the road, and then when everybody begins to enjoy it, sometimes it's not there again. Then secondly, the time at which a road is being maintained, the state of that road matters. Sometimes it may have deteriorated so badly that what we really need is complete rehabilitation and reconstruction. So when somebody goes to maintain it, does the Department of Public Works or the contractor give an indication of how long that maintained road will last? Because there are some interventions that mean that the roads will last maybe only 6 months, but here the people are expecting that this maintenance will last another 5 years, for instance. The reason I'm asking this is, it's not the same thing when a road is being built to last 10 years, and if it's being built to last, say, 20 years. The cost can be significantly different. Somebody asked, why are the roads in Saudi Arabia lasting much longer than the roads being built elsewhere? I was in Las Vegas one time, and I saw a road that was just newly built. It had cracked completely from the beginning to the end. So I just want to say that, do we have any legislation that says, look, it's a must, that if you are building a road, you should give an indication of how long it will last? And then in South Africa, for example, do we have an inventory of when all the roads will be due for maintenance, including the new ones, so that when that time passes, we just know that, yes, it's time for this to be maintained, and things like that.
Okay, noted. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Chairperson. My name is Gideon Kepadise. Both the presentations were thought-provoking, and I thoroughly enjoyed myself listening to them. I just have one question for Madam Kunene, because especially in KZN, there is a lot of construction work that has happened, especially after the flooding. And now the issue there is the construction mafias. Now you have this relationship between the employer and the contractor, and then now you have a third element of construction mafias that want to have a stake or a part of the whatever you call it. How then do you handle that particular situation? Now going back to Prof. Wall, I saw in your presentations a couple of citizens took it upon themselves to fix their roads. You know, is it really legal for us to try and fix our own road? And what are the implications if anything happens while we are trying to fix our roads by ourselves, you know? And we are talking about maintenance. Maybe you can just assist me in terms of, throughout the years, while we are measuring the standard of the infrastructure, have we looked into the effect of theft and vandalism? Because that, in my opinion, it has a lot of negative effect on how the infrastructure operates ultimately. Last question for you, Prof, is that I know it may sound a little bit controversial, but is it really fair for us in South Africa or in Africa to use the same standards, because we are still developing, you know, to use the same categories to measure ourselves as to developed countries such as the US? Is it really fair for us to compare ourselves and to use the same metrics to measure the quality of our infrastructure? We are still developing, you know, we just, you know, really, when you look at US, they've been doing it for over 100 years. The infrastructure has been working. We just got going. Is it really fair for us to use the same standards as the Europeans and the Americans? Thank you.
All right, let's start with you, Madam Kunene, and then the rest are for the Prof.
Thank you for your question. The issue of construction mafia, it's got far-reaching effects. Yes, in KZN, it really has made quite a negative impact in terms of timelines for construction works and of course the unfortunate elements of the fact that now we actually fear for our safety sometimes when you go to sites, which is quite regrettable because service delivery does depend on professionals like ourselves being comfortable and willing to go out and do our work. But I'm going to look at it in the form of dispute resolution, contract management, if you'll allow me, because I think the other things will be, rather, I would not be in the best position to, fully comment. I think it's something that needs some robust discussion in the field. Certain major players need to come to the fore because it's a bigger problem than just a delayed project. So basically what happens when the construction mafia come, they come and they challenge the procurement requirements that were put in the tender document. Typically in the tender document in KZN, you find that there is the move to involve CPGs, that 35% element. So that's clear upfront when the contractor tenders, he tenders for that. The 35% is broken up. He can bring his own CPGs, which are SMMEs, and then there's a portion for the locals. So when construction mafia comes, they sometimes want to change that. So now the contractor can say, oh, this is not what I budgeted for. If you're going to take more chunk, more than this 35%, it means you must take it from somewhere else because I tendered for 75%, so for 65%, I still want my share. You can also now begin to claim for extension of time. Sometimes there's vandalism, so it really has far-reaching effects in the construction, contract management as well side. Really, this type of a problem is best addressed by the politicians, by the municipalities, the councillors, those kind of people, because once you get into the contract, we want to do the work, we want to get it done. We're not really equipped to deal with social issues to that extent. We want to do the work. So that would be my element there to say, dispute resolution, pay the contractor more money. You don't have any other option. Find the money somewhere and pay in terms of contracts management. Otherwise, we encourage our employers, we encourage our premiers, our MECs, our ministers, and everybody in local government to come in and pitch in. EXA, CISA, all those people pitch in, and let's really find a solution for this problem because it's going to get really bad really fast if we just let it roll on like this.
Thank you. Before I forget, there are these copies there. And to answer some of the points that were made, there's a section here called Matters of Critical Importance. It talks about people and relationships, institutional robustness, can management and infrastructure monitoring help, data managing, and then reasons for optimism. To answer the first gentleman here, there is, to my knowledge, no legislation about what you asked about long-lasting, but there have been norms and standards and regulations about maintenance. For example, for the municipal infrastructure grant, I haven't checked it for quite a long while, but at one point in time it had a provision there that part of when the council signs agreement to take the grant, that they must promise that over the next 3 years they're going to put the adequate amount down for operation and maintenance. Now, first of all, to my understanding, there was absolutely no monitoring of that at all, so it was a bit of a joke from that reason. But secondly, 3 years when you're giving a grant for something supposed to last for 20 years or 50 years, it really is a bit of a farce. But that's just what was done. So answer to my question, as far as I know, no, there's nothing. The other gentleman had a long list of thingies. First of all, the easy one, I suppose, is it fair to use the same measurement? Well, I suppose, for example, the roads, as long as we drive the same cars on the road, the car has the same requirements as far as the road evenness is concerned. So to say it's a good road for the car, a bad road for the car, whether it's in America or Cambodia or Australia or South Africa, is probably not an unfair judgment. There are slight nuances. They're not, I don't want to go into detail here, but there are slight differences to make certain allowances. But broadly, the thing works or it doesn't work. And, that's, I don't quite know how you accommodate that. Whether it's in any part of the world, it works or it doesn't work. You can't differentiate between that, whether it's the electricity or the roads or the sewers or anything like that. And if we want, as far as the wastewater, for example, is concerned, if we have the same standards for the effluent discharge, national standards for that, well, to measure the treatment works according to those, we have to do it. And the fact that so it's determined by the standards of discharge as opposed to how do you measure the treatment works. It's determined by those standards of discharge. And if we want to make those lower, well, that's up to us as well. As far as citizens fixing stuff, it's a tricky subject to go into. First of all, the concern would be what is the standard at which the citizen is going to fix it. Now, we've all seen guys standing by the side of the road hoping for some financial contribution because they're fixing potholes by throwing gravel into that. Well, we know it's not going to last. But, from that through to those farmers, and I travelled on some of those roads, they were gravel roads, but they were maintained to top-class standards because the farmers have got the money, the incentive, and some contractor in town supplies gravel and supplies a grader, and they all contribute financially. They can do that because they can afford to do it, and it's important to them. But that's only a small part of the infrastructure of the country. The rest of the country, there's lots of case studies which I've accumulated. It's horses for courses. It just depends what can happen. Theft and vandalism is, it just comes up so quickly and subsides so quickly. I don't know how you accommodate that. How do you make things? The Institution of Municipal Engineering Conference last year, AMISA, they had a very interesting presentation about what is being done down in Kewaha, Port Elizabeth, where they have such problems with pump stations and transformer sites being broken into. And you can understand, you ask how it is that a reinforced concrete housing of this thingy is broken down. Well, the people who organize this thing, they take some unemployed people, a person, and they say, you've got nothing else to do. Here's 200 rand a day, as many days as it takes you. Here's a sledgehammer, break down that concrete so we can get inside. And so what do they do about this? There's even things now, they put locks on it, and there's South African manufacturers of this stuff, put a manual cover with a lock on it with a timer. And you cannot break that thing open unless you've got a jackhammer. You can't break it open. You can only open it if you've got the right keys and stuff with the electronic link, and it's set only at a certain time. And that's but it costs a lot of money to do that. You can't just do that everywhere. So you can fight it in that way, but it's costing that precaution against breaking in is costing more than the thing cost in the first place. But the fact that the thing gets broken so often, they just had to put it in because otherwise they can't maintain the service. So I just don't know how you sort that thing out. But maybe job creation is part of the answer. And when I was at the CSR, we did some calculations of the job creation possibilities. Bear in mind that the majority of the people in this country who are unemployed are those at the lowest level, those who never got matric. They with the least skills. Now, a lot of maintenance, routine maintenance, can be done by people like that. So there's jobs to be created for people like that on a permanent basis, because if there's infrastructure, that road's got to be attended to twice a week. Well, that thing's got to be attended to twice a month. So you don't have to travel. You can give local people a piece of a road, a piece of something else to maintain. And it can be the people with the lowest levels of skills who otherwise are totally unemployed. We did some of that work down in the Eastern Cape using a social franchising model as well, which worked really well. So we worked out that between 250,000 and 500,000 full-time jobs can be created. which doesn't solve the country's unemployment problem, but it makes a heck of a contribution, a big contribution. Thank you.
Okay. I know there's probably much more questions, but looking at the time now, I would hate to stand between you and lunch, so can we adjourn from now, and then feel free to engage the speakers offline. Please. Do you mind if we adjourn?
Yes, I do.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you for your understanding. We are adjourned. Enjoy lunch.
Congratulations, because you've reduced 2 hours behind schedule to only 3/4 of an hour.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much.